The sea, an endless, shifting canvas of pewter and pearl, stretched before me. My vessel, the silent current, a sturdy, unassuming fishing boat, cut a gentle furrow through the pre-dawn swell. The air, crisp with the salt tang of the deep, filled my lungs, a balm I had sought for years. Here, amidst the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the mournful cry of gulls, I had found a fragile peace. Omar, the phantom of vaults and shadows, was a ghost I hoped to outrun forever. My hands, calloused and scarred, moved with practiced ease across the worn rigging, securing a loose line. They remembered the delicate precision of tumblers, the cool kiss of polished steel, but now they knew only the rough embrace of rope and the slick scales of the morning's catch. Each knot tied, each net cast, was an anchor to this new existence, a deliberate renunciation of the old. I watched the horizon bleed into hues of rose and gold, painting a masterpiece I never truly appreciated in the dark confines of my former life. A small, framed photograph, tucked discreetly behind the compass in the cabin, often caught my eye. Layla, her smile, bright and defiant, a mirror to my own stubborn will. She deserved a father who wasn't a whisper in the underworld, a legend spoken in hushed tones by men who feared the light. My heart, a weary drum, ached with the weight of that distance, a constant, dull throb beneath the surface of my hard-won tranquility. Today, however, carried a different current, a subtle tremor, a premonition that pricked at the edges of my practiced calm. I wasn't just fishing. My eyes scanned the water, not for schools of mackerel, but for a specific silhouette. A rendezvous, a small, infrequent indulgence I allowed myself, a way to move certain untraceable goods, antique compasses, rare books for a quiet collector in the city. The sun had fully cleared the horizon when I spotted it. A larger trawler, its hull weathered, its rigging a tangle of lines, appearing from behind a distant promontory. It was the Serpent, captained by a grizzled veteran whose face was a roadmap of sun and wind. We had an understanding, an unspoken code of conduct that allowed for these discreet exchanges, far from prying eyes. I steered the silent current alongside the trawler, the gentle slap of waves against our hulls the only sound. The trawler's deckhand, a young man with wary eyes, threw a mooring line across, and I caught it with a practiced flick of my wrist. The captain of the Serpent, a man known only as the skipper, leaned over his rail, his face expressionless. "Good morning, Omar," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Skipper," I replied, my own voice low, betraying none of the apprehension tightening my chest. This was the fishing boat at sea during transfer. Usually, a crate of preserved fish for my contact, a small wrapped parcel of rare coins for him. A simple, almost mundane transaction. But today, something felt wrong. The air, usually thick with the smell of brine and diesel, seemed to hum with an unspoken tension. The deckhand, instead of moving to the usual exchange point, lingered by the trawler's stern, his gaze darting to the open sea. Then, the skipper reached into a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. My breath caught, a snagged net in my throat. He didn't pull out the small wooden box I expected. The architect, a ghost from a past I had meticulously buried, a name whispered in the darkest corners, always associated with impassable designs and ruthless efficiency. My muscles tensed, every instinct screaming danger. I took the pouch. My fingers, accustomed to discerning the smallest imperfections in metal, felt the distinct, familiar shape within the velvet. A small, silver hummingbird pendant, Layla's. The one I'd given her for her 10th birthday, a symbol of freedom she'd always cherished. My eyes snapped to the skipper's. His gaze was still unreadable, but a flicker of grim sympathy, or perhaps fear, passed through them. My hands trembled as I opened the pouch. Nestled beside the hummingbird was a folded slip of paper. My vision blurred for a moment, then sharpened, focusing on the stark, elegant script. "He is my design now, your final masterpiece or her final breath. The clock begins." The words were a hammer blow, shattering the fragile piece I had built. The world tilted on its axis. My daughter. The past, a predator I thought I had outrun, had finally caught up, not for me, but for the one person I had tried so desperately to protect from its clutches. The quiet life was over. The game had begun anew. Had tried so desperately to protect. The name Layla hung in the air, a phantom bell tolling the end of my quietude. My breath hitched, a jagged stone caught in my throat. The tranquil horizon, moments ago a balm, now seemed to mark me, stretching endlessly, a vast, indifferent canvas to my sudden, crushing despair. A cold hand, firm and unyielding, clamped onto my arm. I didn't resist. What point was there? The world had already come undone. I was led, not roughly, but with an unspoken urgency, away from the lapping waves, past the scent of salt and drying nets, towards a wading vehicle. The journey was a blur of muted colors, and the drone of an engine, my mind a tempest of fear and a burgeoning, icy rage. Each turn of the wheel was a turn deeper into the labyrinth I had sworn to escape. Then the ocean again, but this time, beneath my feet, the gentle sway of a deck. I found myself on a fishing boat at sea during transfer, its diesel engine thrumming a low, guttural beat that vibrated through the worn planks. The air was thick with the brine and the metallic tang of old fish, a scent that usually grounded me, but now felt alien, suffocating. The sky above was a bruised twilight, the last vestiges of the sun bleeding into a murky grey. Inside the small, cramped cabin, lit by a single, flickering lantern, a figure waited. He was a man of shadows and angles, his face unreadable beneath the brim of a dark cap. He wasn't overtly threatening, yet the stillness of his posture, the absolute lack of superfluous movement, broadcast a silent menace more potent than any shouted threat. He gestured to a worn bench opposite him. I sat, my muscles stiff, my gaze fixed on his. "Omar," he said, his voice a low rasp, like sand against stone. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement, a recognition that pierced through the layers of anonymity I had painstakingly constructed. "The architect sends his regards." The name hung in the close air, a premonition of ruin. To be acknowledged by him was to be marked. "Layla," I managed, the name a raw wound escaping my lips. The stranger reached into an inner pocket of his oilskin jacket. He produced a small, laminated photograph. My hands trembled as I took it. It was Layla, her bright, defiant eyes wide with fear, her mouth gagged, her wrists bound with what looked like industrial-grade zip ties. He was in a dimly lit, concrete space, an underground bunker, perhaps, or an abandoned factory. The detail of a faded, red-painted no-entry sign partially visible behind her, its corner chipped, seared itself into my memory. My daughter, my vibrant, spirited Layla, reduced to this. The quiet hum of the engine seemed to amplify the frantic beat of my own heart. He is. A task, rather. One only you can accomplish. I looked up, my eyes burning, the photograph a branding iron in my hand. "What does he want?" "A legend," the stranger replied, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in his posture, a flicker of something akin to reverence in his otherwise flat tone. "The Eye of Osiris, not the jewel, Omar, the mechanism, the device that secures it, the very heart of the vault." My mind, despite the whirlwind of panic, snagged on the words. The Eye of Osiris. I knew of it, of course. It was less an object to be stolen, and more a riddle to be solved, guarded within a high-security vault deep beneath the financial district of a city I knew too well. The vault itself was a fortress, layers of reinforced steel, laser grids, pressure plates, and biometrics. Its very existence was a challenge, its reputation legendary. To attempt to breach it was suicide. To steal its security mechanism, unheard of. "It's impossible," I said, the words tasting like ash. "No one could get near it, let alone dismantle its core." The stranger offered no argument, only a slow, deliberate nod. "Precisely why the architect requires my specific talents, Omar, your artistry, your singular understanding of larks and their breaking. He knows your past. He knows your reputation. He knows you are the only one with the ghost-like touch required to make such a thing vanish." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into mine. "You have 7 days. Deliver the eye's mechanism or Layla's comfort will cease, permanently." He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a sleek, encrypted device. He slid it across the table. "This contains the preliminary schematics and a single encrypted line of communication. Use it wisely. Do not try to contact the authorities. Do not try to run. The architect has eyes everywhere. He knows every move you've made since your retirement." My carefully constructed anonymity, my quiet life, my very existence had been an open book to him. He hadn't just found me. He had been watching, waiting, biding his time. My gaze fell back to Layla's terrified face in the photograph. The chipped red sign, the industrial zip ties, the silent plea in her eyes. The choice was no choice at all. My past, the very thing I had fled, was now the only key to her future. A bitter taste filled my mouth, a potent cocktail of fear and a nascent, furious resolve. I was a ghost no longer. The fishing boat continued its relentless journey through the bruised twilight, carrying me, Omar, the retired safecracker, back into the heart of the storm. The fishing boat continued its relentless journey through the bruised twilight, carrying me, Omar, the retired safecracker, back into the abyss. The cabin air, thick with the ghosts of stale cigarettes and the lingering metallic tang of diesel, pressed down on me. The sea, a restless beast outside, slapped against the hull, its rhythmic thud a counterpoint to the frantic drumbeat in my chest. I traced the edge of Layla's photograph, her smile a fragile, defiant beacon against the encroaching gloom. He was light. This device in my hand, a heavy obsidian shard, was pure shadow. It was an old-world piece, crafted for discretion, not flash. No touchscreens, no glowing logos. Just a dense block of hardened polymer and brushed steel, devoid of any obvious ports or buttons. The architect's signature, I suspected a preference for the anachronistic, the stubbornly analog in a digital age. My fingers, once nimble enough to coax secrets from the most intricate tumblers, now felt clumsy, unaccustomed to such a crude yet complex puzzle. This wasn't a vault, but a communication conduit. Its lock was a sequence, a specific series of tactile inputs I had to divine. I began my reluctant preparations. I ran my thumb over the device's unyielding surface, searching for seams, for a hidden catch. My eyes, honed by decades of finding the invisible flaws in steel and stone, scanned its minimalist form. There were faint, almost imperceptible etchings, a constellation of tiny raised darts that formed no immediate pattern. Not Braille, not Morse. Something else. A language of touch, perhaps, known only to a select few. Hours bled into the deep, churning night. The fishing boat at sea during transfer rocked me like a cradle of torment. My mind, usually a precise instrument, felt like a rusted mechanism, grinding against itself. Frustration, a bitter bile, rose in my throat. This was not a safe. There was no combination, no vault door to listen to. This was a riddle wrapped in an enigma, designed to filter out anyone but the intended recipient. Or perhaps anyone but someone with my particular brand of patience, my stubborn refusal to yield. Then a flicker, not of light but of intuition. I remembered a particular type of lock, a forgotten European design from my earlier days, which relied on a counterintuitive pressure system. Not a sequence of numbers, but a specific rhythm of firmness and release on certain points. I found 3 such points on the device, barely distinguishable from the surrounding material. I pressed the first, held, then released. The second, a different pressure, a longer hold. The third, a quick tap. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated within the device. A tiny pinprick of green light bloomed on its surface, then steadied. Success. Or rather, the first step towards a precipice. A small, pixelated screen flickered to life, displaying a single, cryptic instruction, a frequency, old-world shortwave, and a time. No names, no context, just the bare bones of a clandestine rendezvous. The architect wasn't just forcing my hand. He was forcing me to use his channels, to play by his rules. I retrieved my own relic from a hidden compartment beneath the cabin's bench, a battered, pre-digital satellite phone, scarred by salt and time. It was an antique, but reliable, capable of reaching the far corners of the underworld if you knew the right numbers. I cross-referenced the frequency from the architect's device with my own, a slow, methodical process of tuning and adjusting. My finger hovered over the call button. This was it. The first tendril back into the mire I had so desperately tried to escape. Layla. Her face in the photograph hardened my resolve. I pressed the button. Static hissed, then a click. A voice, raspy with age and suspicion, answered. I read a ghost, old man. Thought the sea had claimed I years ago. It was the collector, a man whose real name had been lost to time and countless transactions, a purveyor of rare information and even rarer artifacts. He operated from the fringes, a spider at the center of a web of secrets. Urgently. A dry chuckle crackled through the line. Urgency is a common malady in my line of work. What makes yours special? And why now, after all these years of your self-imposed exile? It's personal, I answered, omitting the truth, the name of my daughter. To speak it aloud, even to the collector, felt like exposing a raw nerve. A phantom has taken something from me, something irreplaceable. A phantom, you say? The collector's voice sharpened, losing its amused edge. The architect, perhaps. He's been stirring up the dust lately. A new game, a new appetite for chaos. His reach, Omar, stretches further than you could imagine. He's been systematically cutting off old lines, co-opting networks, making it very difficult for freelancers to operate. My heart clenched. This was the first obstacle, a wall rising before I'd even taken a step, about his latest obsession. There was a long pause, filled only by the crackle of the line and the relentless slap of the waves. He's after something legendary, Omar. Something beyond mere monetary value. They call it Chronos Shard. The name hung in the air, weighty and ominous. I had never heard of it. My world had always been about physical larks, tangible barriers. A shard suggested something more ethereal, more dangerous. This wasn't just a heist. It was a delve into the truly unknown. And what of my old contacts? I asked, pushing past the new mystery. The network, can I still reach them? Another sigh from the collector. Most have gone silent. Others, they've been absorbed. The architect has a way of making people disappear, or worse, making them loyal. I am a relic, a known quantity, and a liability in his new world order. Anyone associated with anyone who helps now, risks everything. The architect had not just kidnapped Layla. He had isolated me, cut me off from the very resources I would need to fight him. This wasn't just a heist. It was a trap, meticulously laid, designed not just for the artifact, but for me. The weight of the encrypted device in my hand felt heavier, a tether to a world I no longer recognized, a world where the rules had been rewritten by a phantom. The fishing boat at sea during transfer continued its journey, carrying me deeper into the labyrinth, alone. The encrypted device, a cold stone in my palm, pulsed with the architect's cruel message. Layla, my Layla, a pawn in a game I hadn't asked to play. The silence of my quiet life, so carefully cultivated, shattered like fragile glass. This wasn't just a heist for an artifact. It was a meticulously crafted snare, designed to pull me back into the very abyss I had escaped. My jaw tightened, a familiar fire rekindling in my gut. I was cornered, yes, but a cornered animal still had teeth. First, I needed eyes and ears. I picked up the burner phone, its cheap plastic a stark contrast to the architect's polished tech. The first number I dialed belonged to the network weaver, a phantom who could connect me to anyone, anywhere, for a price. A series of coded phrases, a dance of veiled meanings, and the connection was made. The network weaver promised a meet, a location chosen for its anonymity and the constant churn of the tides. Hours later, under the shroud of a moonless night, I stood on a dilapidated dock, the air thick with the scent of salt and diesel. A small, nondescript vessel bobbed gently beside the pier. Its hull was scarred, its paint faded, a perfect disguise for clandestine meetings. The deckhand, a burly figure with eyes that missed nothing, grunted a greeting, then gestured me aboard. Omar, a voice, low and raspy, greeted me from the cramped cabin below deck. He was older now, lines etched around her sharp eyes, but the intensity remained. Heard you were finally pulled back into the muck. Some muck sticks harder than others, I replied, the words a bitter taste. I need you to open a door, a very specific door, and tell me what you find on the other side. She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. The architect, I presume. He's been making waves, bigger than your usual splash, Omar. Layla, I stated, the name a raw wound. He has my daughter. The amusement vanished, replaced by a grim understanding. Ah, that changes things. He plays for keeps. What's the target? I handed her the encrypted device. This points to it, a legendary piece, but I think it's more than just a trophy. She took the device, her nimble fingers already working its surface. Always is with him. The engine's thrum was a rhythmic pulse beneath my feet, a counterpoint to the frantic beating of my heart. Hours bled into one another. This device, it's a key, not just to a vault, but to a network. The architect isn't just stealing a relic. He's activating something far larger. What kind of network? I leaned forward, the salt spray on my face doing little to cool the heat of my rising apprehension. Think global. Data streams, financial conduits, influence peddling. The artifact isn't the prize, it's the trigger. It's designed to interface with a system he's been building for years. A system that could destabilize entire markets, perhaps even governments, if he wanted to. His eyes, usually so focused, now held a glint of fear. He's not just a thief, Omar. He's an architect of chaos, and the artifact, it's the master switch. The weight of her words settled on me, heavier than any ocean. The architect wasn't after a valuable item. He was after control. Layla was not just bait. He was leverage in a game far beyond my understanding. The trap was indeed deeper, more intricate than I had imagined. This wasn't just a heist. It was a desperate race against a looming catastrophe. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the night. The network weaver, his form rigid, pointed starboard. Lights, fast approaching, not a fishing trawler. My gaze snapped to the distant pinpricks of light, growing rapidly larger. The architect had anticipated my moves. He hadn't just cut me off, he was actively hunting me. The fishing boat at sea during transfer, once a sanctuary, was now a vulnerable target. My crew, barely assembled, was already facing the fire. This wasn't just a complication, it was an ambush. The game had begun, and the architect was playing with brutal efficiency. The ocean, once a vast, indifferent expanse, now felt like a cage. The pinpricks of light had bloomed into the harsh glare of floodlights, cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. A sleek, black hull, lean and predatory, was carving through the waves, gaining on my fishing boat at sea during transfer with an unnerving swiftness. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my gut. The architect wasn't just observing, he was closing in, a hunter on the scent. The deck beneath my worn boots vibrated with the thrum of the engine, a futile defiance against the inevitable. I scanned the horizon, then the small, cluttered deck. Nets, coils of rope, the pungent scent of brine and diesel, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide that would offer true sanctuary. My mind raced, sifting through the years of shadows and escapes, trying to pull a forgotten trick from the depths. This wasn't a city alley, nor a bank vault. This was open water, and the odds were tilting sharply against me. A guttural roar ripped through the air as the pursuer's engine intensified, its bow wave slapping against our hull. A grappling hook shot across the gap, its claw biting into the gunwale with a sickening thud. Then another, and another. I ducked behind a stack of empty crates, the rough wood scraping against my jacket. My hand instinctively went to the heavy wrench I'd stowed earlier, its cold metal a small comfort. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from a fierce primal surge of defiance. I wouldn't yield, not now, not ever. A shadow fell over my makeshift cover. Our eyes met across the dim light of the boat. No words were exchanged, none were needed. It was a silent challenge, a testament to the architect's reach. Before the operative could react, I lunged, not at him, but at the main engine control panel, yanking a crucial cable free with a sharp tug. The operative roared, startled by my unexpected move, and raised his weapon. I twisted, throwing myself against a pile of fishing gear, sending nets and buoys scattering. I scrambled, using the chaos as cover, weaving through the rigging, my old muscles protesting but obeying. My destination, the small, cramped cabin. A desperate, foolish hope. Inside the cabin was a mess of charts and empty coffee cups. I slammed the flimsy door shut, knowing it wouldn't hold. I had seconds. My eyes darted around, searching for anything, a tool, a weapon, an escape route. Beneath a pile of old newspapers, my fingers brushed against something hard, metallic, and distinctly out of place. It was a small, rugged data slate, unlike any commercial device I'd ever seen, with a faint, almost invisible symbol etched into its casing, a stylized, interlocking helix. The door splintered under a heavy boot. I snatched the slate, tucking it into my inner pocket, just as the door gave way, revealing two more operatives. I didn't hesitate. With a desperate lunge, I kicked out the small, rusted porthole, shattering the glass. and plunged into the icy embrace of the sea. I heard shouts, then the splash of bodies entering the water behind me. The current was strong, pulling me away from the boats out into the open. It was a gamble, a desperate, freezing gamble, but it was a chance. Hours later, half frozen and exhausted, I washed up on a deserted stretch of coastline, miles from where I'd intended to be. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but my grip on the small data slate in my pocket was iron tight. The architect had forced my hand, pushed me over the edge of my quiet retirement and back into the maelstrom. I pulled out the data slate, my fingers numb as I fumbled with its interface. It powered on, displaying a complex, incomplete schematic. It wasn't a blueprint for the legendary artifact itself, nor for its vault. No, this was something far grander, far more disturbing. It depicted a vast, intricate network, a web of interconnected, fortified locations, spanning continents, each node marked with that same interlocking helix symbol. A project aimed at absolute, global control of information and resources, abandoned decades ago due to its sheer impassability and the internal strife it caused. The artifact, the one Layla's freedom hinged upon, was depicted on the schematic not as the prize, but as a critical component of this Nexus protocol, a key to activating a specific node within its sprawling architecture. The architect wasn't merely interested in acquiring a valuable antique. He was trying to finish what others had failed to complete. He was building an empire, not just stealing a treasure. And he needed me, Omar, the safecracker from the old world, to unlock the very linchpin of his terrifying ambition. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Layla wasn't just bait. He was leverage in a game far larger and deadlier than I had ever imagined. The architect's true motive wasn't greed. It was absolute power. My task wasn't just a heist. It was an act of war. I looked out at the endless ocean, the rising sun painting streaks of gold across the waves. The quiet life was a distant memory, shattered. I was in this now, irrevocably, not just for Layla, but to stop the architect from unleashing this ancient, terrible dream upon the world. The point of no return had been crossed. My hands, once retired, now trembled with a renewed, grim purpose. The ocean's breath, cold and unforgiving, clawed at my skin as the fishing boat at sea during transfer pitched and groaned beneath us. Above, the sky wept a thin, ceaseless drizzle, blurring the horizon into a watercolor of grey. I gripped the cold, salt-encrusted rail, the spray stinging my eyes, not quite masking the burn of unshed tears. Layla's face, a phantom behind the mist, spurred my every strained breath. The Nexus protocol. The words, once a forgotten echo from a past I had buried, now vibrated with a dangerous, urgent hum in my mind. A legend, a ghost story for the underworld, resurrected for my daughter's ransom. Two figures, shrouded in oilskins, wrestled with a heavy, waterproofed crate, its contents vital for the impossible task ahead. The younger man, agile and quick, secured the lines with practiced efficiency. The older, his face a roadmap of hard-lived years, directed with curt, efficient gestures. They were professionals, part of the architect's grim entourage, their loyalty a question mark etched into the unforgiving night. Careful with that, I rasped, my voice hoarse against the wind. It's more fragile than it looks. The older man grunted, his gaze meeting mine for a flicker, devoid of warmth. We know our job, Omar. The use of my name, a stark reminder of who I was, of the past I couldn't outrun, tightened the knot in my gut. The transfer was an intricate dance with the elements. We were meant to rendezvous with a smaller, faster craft, a phantom that would emerge from the swells, take the precious cargo and vanish again. But the sea, as always, had its own capricious will. The wind began to shriek, a banshee's wail, and the drizzle thickened into a curtain of rain. A storm now. This wasn't in the architect's meticulously planned schedule, or was it? My mind raced, sifting through possibilities, through the layers of deception I knew were inherent in this game. A sudden, monstrous wave rose from the churning depths, a liquid mountain that crashed over the bow with the force of a battering ram. I braced myself, my muscles screaming, as the fishing boat was thrown sideways, a toy in the ocean's furious grip. A sickening crack echoed above the storm's roar. The boom, straining under the weight of the hoisted crate, groaned in protest. The rope holding the precious cargo, taut as a violin string, began to fray with agonizing slowness. "Hold it," I roared, pushing through the deluge, my eyes fixed on the weakening rope. "It's going to snap." But it was too late. With a final sharp crack, the rope gave way. The heavy crate, containing the heart of my desperate mission, swung wildly, a pendulum of doom, before smashing against the boat's railing with a sound of splintering wood and tortured metal. The impact sent a jolt through the deck, and then, with a splash that seemed to mark our efforts, the crate tumbled into the churning blackness of the sea. A collective gasp, quickly swallowed by the wind, escaped the crew. My breath hitched. This was it, near catastrophe. The heist, barely begun, already crippled. My focus, however, was not on the lost crate, but on the splintered railing where it had struck. I lunged, snatching it before the next wave could claim it. It wasn't just wood or metal. It was a composite, a material I recognized from a project decades ago, a proprietary blend used in high-security applications, rarely seen outside of a very specific, very secretive manufacturing consortium. And embedded within this fragment, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny, almost microscopic chip. It wasn't a tracking device. It was too small, too primitive. It was a signature, a deliberately placed, almost artistic flaw. The architect, not the architect himself, but the craftsman he employed. A ghost from my own past, a rival artisan whose work I knew intimately, whose meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail included leaving subtle, almost artistic, flaws, a signature. This wasn't just an accident. This was sabotage, a calculated risk, a deliberate weakening of the very tools meant to breach the Nexus protocol. The architect hadn't just given me a task. He had set a trap within a trap, ensuring my failure, or at least making it exponentially harder. He wanted to watch me struggle to break me. My gaze snapped to the older man, the one who had handled the crate with such supposed care. The fishing boat continued its violent dance, the storm a furious accompaniment to the new, bitter realization churning within me. Layla's life hung by a thread, and now, not only was the path ahead fraught with external peril, but the very ground beneath my feet was riddled with unseen pits. I gripped the cold, salt-encrusted rail, the spray stinging my eyes, not daring to look away from the churning expanse. Layla. Her name was a silent scream within the confines of my skull. The architect. He stopped a few paces from me, the wind whipping his collar, yet he remained perfectly still, an anchor in the storm. "Omar." His voice was a low hum, barely audible above the engine's thrum and the waves' slap. "You're punctual, a rare trait in your former profession." I turned, my gaze locking onto his, searching for any flicker of humanity, finding only polished granite. "Where is she?" The words were raw, torn from my throat. He offered no immediate answer, merely a slow, deliberate gesture towards the boat's aft. Two hulking figures, the Syndicate's enforcers, emerged from a hatch, their bulk a grim testament to their purpose. Between them, a smaller, shrouded form. My breath hitched. A rush of blood roared in my ears, drowning out the sea, the wind, everything but the image of that form. Reveal. One of the enforcers roughly pulled back the canvas, revealing a small, sturdy cage. Inside, huddled and pale, was Layla. Her eyes, wide with fear and exhaustion, found mine across the turbulent deck. A gasp escaped me, a ragged sound I barely recognized as my own. He was alive, bruised, yes, and bound, but alive. A fragile ember of hope ignited in the desolate landscape of my despair. The sight of her, so vulnerable yet so defiantly present, forged my resolve into something harder than steel. As promised, the architect said, his voice devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. "Your incentive, now for mine." He nodded to the other enforcer, who carefully placed a heavy, ornate chest onto a reinforced table bolted to the deck. It was not merely a chest. It was a monolith of polished obsidian and gleaming brass, intricate gears and interlocking plates forming a dizzying three-dimensional puzzle. This was it, the legendary artifact. It pulsed with a silent challenge, its surface reflecting the grey sky like a black mirror. "The heart of Erebus," the architect murmured, almost to himself. A fitting name, wouldn't you agree? Ancient, impenetrable, a repository of secrets. He then looked at me, a sliver of something akin to amusement in his eyes. My associates believed it impossible to move, let alone open. But I knew better. I knew of you, Omar, the one man who could truly appreciate its artistry and then inevitably defile it. "What do you want?" I asked, my eyes darting between Layla's cage and the artifact. The boat continued its rhythmic sway, making the task ahead even more precarious. "The contents," he replied simply, "and your legend irrevocably tarnished by serving me, a double victory." He gestured towards the chest. "You have 1 hour. Fail and her freedom, and perhaps her life, becomes irrelevant." The enforcers shifted, their stances radiating menace. The wind seemed to howl Layla's name. I walked towards the obsidian chest, my hands already flexing, my mind racing through the labyrinthine mechanics I could only imagine lay beneath its surface. It wasn't a conventional safe. No obvious tumblers, no dial. This was a masterwork of ancient engineering, designed to confuse and deter. Each brass plate was etched with cryptic symbols, interlocking like a cosmic clockwork. I noticed the faint discoloration around a series of small, almost invisible pins near the base, a sign of previous attempts, perhaps. A subtle irregularity in the pattern of the obsidian near one corner, a hairline fracture barely perceptible unless I was looking for it. "A simple lark," the architect observed, a hint of mockery in his tone. "For a simple man." I ignored him, my senses heightened. The boat's shuddering motion was a challenge, but also a rhythm I could internalize. I knelt, pulling out my specialized tools, picks of tempered steel, a miniature bore, a sensitive stethoscope-like device. The cold metal of the chest seeped into my fingertips. My initial approach was methodical, testing each plate, listening for the faint click of internal mechanisms. The architect had placed Layla's cage just within my peripheral vision. Every time I looked up, her wide, pleading eyes spurred me on, a silent, agonizing clerk. I pressed my ear against the obsidian, the subtle vibrations of the boat, the distant roar of the ocean, all filtered through the sensitive earpiece. This wasn't about brute force. It was about finesse, about understanding the mind of the craftsman who had built this puzzle centuries ago. There were 7 primary segments, each requiring a specific sequence of movements. I started with the lowest segment, a series of 3 interlocking brass rings. The first ring turned with a soft resistance, clicking into place. The second, however, was jammed. I paused, my breath held, my eyes scanning the intricate etchings. A specific symbol, a stylized serpent, seemed to be slightly raised. I applied gentle pressure with a flat pick, and with a barely audible snick, the second ring released, turning freely. The third ring, I realized, wasn't meant to be turned directly. It was a pressure plate, subtly disguised. My fingers, calloused from a lifetime of such work, found the sweet spot. I pressed, and a small internal mechanism whirred, a faint tremor running through the obsidian. 1 down. The next segment was a series of sliding panels, each adorned with a different celestial motif. The architect watched me, unblinking, a silent judge. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on my shoulders. One wrong move, one false click, and everything could seize. I worked with a dancer's precision, my fingers an extension of my will. I saw the patterns, the subtle misalignments, the minute tolerances that were the artifact's true language. The celestial panels were a red herring. The real mechanism was in the tiny, almost invisible pins I had noted earlier. They were not for prying, but for a specific, almost rotational push, each one triggering a corresponding internal lever. Time blurred. The wind howled its mournful song. The boat lurched, throwing me off balance, but my hands remained steady, anchored by sheer force of will. Event. With a deep, resonant groan, the entire front face of the obsidian chest shifted. Not a door, but a complex, multi-layered unfolding. Gears whirred, polished brass panels slid back, revealing a deeper chamber lined with velvet. The architect's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his impassive face. I had done it. I had cracked the impenetrable. I looked up, my gaze sweeping past the scrolls, past the architect to Layla. He was staring at me, a tentative, tremulous smile beginning to bloom on her bruised face. The artifact was open. Now for her. The fishing boat at sea during transfer pitched and rolled, a rhythmic cradle and scourge against my concentration. The brine-laced air tasted of freedom and peril, a duality mirrored in the cold steel beneath my fingers. My specialized tools, extensions of my will, danced across the chest's intricate surface. The miniature bore hummed a low, urgent prayer, each turn a whisper against the vault's final secrets. I was no longer merely a safe cracker. I was a surgeon of steel, operating on the heart of my fractured past. A soft, almost imperceptible click resonated through the stethoscope-like device pressed to my ear. It was the sound of a universe realigning, a lark yielding its stubborn hold. My breath, held captive for what felt like an eternity, finally released. The lid, heavy with its own history, lifted with a faint hiss of displaced air, revealing the legendary artifact within. This was it, the impassable prize, the ransom for a life. Yet, as my eyes traced its contours, a faint anomaly caught my attention. A hairline seam, too precise to be ornamental, running along the chest's inner lining. My heart, a drum against my ribs, quickened. This wasn't merely the vault's last gasp, it was a new breath. I ran a gloved finger along the seam, pressing, probing. Another soft click, quieter this time, a secret within a secret. A slender panel slid away, revealing a cavity no larger than my thumb. Inside, nestled on a bed of microfoam, was not another jewel but a device. A tiny, unassuming data chip, no bigger than a fingernail, and a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled as I retrieved them. The parchment was a faded map, crude lines sketching a forgotten corner of the city, an abandoned factory district. A single, circled mark glowed faintly, a beacon in the past, but it was the data chip that hummed with a nascent power. I slotted it into the small, encrypted reader I carried, a relic from my own ghost-filled days. The screen flickered to life, displaying not just real-time coordinates, but a cascade of encrypted files. These weren't mere instructions. They were ledger entries, dates, names, the very sinews of the syndicate laid bare. And among them, a direct data stream, a pulsing dart on a map, my daughter. Her location, updated every second. The architect's intricate web, exposed by his own hubris. He had forced me to steal the artifact, believing he held all the cards, but I had just stolen his entire hand. The transfer is complete. A gruff voice cut through the thrum of the boat. The syndicate's enforcer, a hulking figure with eyes like chips of flint, loomed over me. Hand it over. I looked up. The obsidian artifact still in the open chest, data chip now secured in my pocket, its warmth a tangible promise. Indeed, I responded, my voice steady, though a tempest raged within. The transfer is complete. I closed the chest, the thud echoing the finality of my decision. But the terms, they have changed. I stood, the rocking of the boat now a dance of defiance. The architect will not be pleased. The enforcer scoffed, reaching for the chest. That's not your concern, old man. It is now, I replied, stepping back. My hand, quick as a viper, snatched a small, heavy wrench from my toolkit. He had expected compliance, not resistance. This artifact, I continued, gesturing to the chest, it holds a different kind of power than you understand. And your employer, he has underestimated the lengths a father will go. Before he could react, I activated a small, concealed device in my palm. A high-frequency pulse, designed to scramble communication, surged through the boat. His comms unit sputtered. He snarled, lunging forward. I met him not with brute force, but with the calculated precision of years, spent anticipating pressure points and vulnerabilities. A quick feint, a strike to the knee with the wrench, followed by a swift, practiced movement that sent him sprawling against the railing. He cried out, more in surprise than pain, as I bound his wrists with a length of rope I prepared, a silent premonition of this very moment. The boat was theirs no longer. It was mine. With the enforcer secured, I took the helm, the coordinates from the data chip already loaded into the navigation system. The fishing boat, once a vessel of forced compliance, now became a swift arrow aimed at salvation. The journey was a blur of sea and sky, my gaze fixed on the glowing dart that represented my daughter. The abandoned factory district loomed out of the pre-dawn gloom, a skeletal landscape of rusted metal and broken glass. I docked the boat in a derelict cove, the air thick with the scent of decay and the promise of confrontation. The tracker led me deeper, to a vast, echoing chamber where a single flickering bulb illuminated a makeshift cell. There he was, my daughter. Her head snapped up, her eyes, once filled with accusation, now held a dawning hope. "Father!" I moved swiftly, a ghost of my former self, bypassing the crude lark with a practiced ease that felt both alien and intimately familiar. As the door swung open, she stumbled into my arms, a rush of warmth and fragility against me. The scent of her hair, the fragile weight of her body, it was a moment beyond words, a lifetime of unspoken apologies and unfulfilled promises compressed into a single embrace. "I'm here," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion, holding her close as if to absorb her into my very being. "I'm so sorry." She clung to me. We sat on the dock, the fishing boat barbing gently beside us. His intricate plans, his network of operatives, his very identity, all revealed and now undone. The legendary artifact, no longer a tool of leverage, was simply a relic, its power diminished by the greater force of a father's resolve. "What now?" my daughter asked, her voice still quiet, but her eyes, no longer haunted, met mine with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. I looked out at the vast expanse of the sea, its surface mirroring the infinite possibilities of a new horizon. I had faced the architect of my fears, not with a weapon, but with the very skills I had once tried to bury. And in doing so, I had not only saved her, but found a purpose beyond the quiet anonymity I had sought. "Now," I added, a gentle smile touching my lips, "we build something new. Together." The sea wind carried my words, a promise whispered to the rising sun, a new chapter unfurling with the dawn. The past was a scar, but the future, for the first time in a long time, felt like an open road.